Okay.
Hello, Parallel Perception community. This is Angel Samadhi. I'm here with Luhan Matus, and we are on our 5th of 5 videos, taking a deep dive into the power of emptiness. So if you have not watched the first 4, please go back and do so. You'll enjoy it. Hello, Luhan.
Hey, Angel, how you doing?
Good. Anything you want to say before we get started?
Oh, I appreciate you so much.
Oh, well, thank you kindly. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and we're going to start with the last 6 chapters, which begin with heaven and earth. And I'm going to recap our last video, what we covered. We looked into how morphogenesis and how knowing and doing is homeostasis, while not doing is morphogenesis. We looked at how we can benefit from and stimulate our hallways of awareness. Are we aware of our own omnipresence to facilitate divine timing? I enjoyed that. And the riddle, we concluded with the riddle to answer that question: do you realize, or do you really realize? So today we're going to go over heaven and earth, and the other chapters are the power of the old Tibetan, the chant, as I am, the blessing, and gratitude. Okay, so I started out with heaven and earth, and you embodied that as 2 qualities of our humanness: our earthbound focus versus our heavenly process. Is there anything you want to say to introduce us and get us started?
Well, if you look at the vacuous element of within us, this is the rising force within us, and then there's a sinking force within us. So you look at it as if you hang yourself from a coat hanger, or even so, you imagine what it's like to jump into water with all your clothes on, and then you get out of the water, and everything's pulling you down. Everything's very, very heavy, so you're encumbered by the weight of your clothes. So that you can imagine this is the earthly force, or the sinking of the flesh, relaxing the flesh, so that everything knits and falls into place and finds its correct position for triangulation in terms of what the focus is for each specific exercise that you're doing. So it's but there are more than these 2 forces. There's left and right, there's front and back, there's up and down, left and right. So you've got many directions to take into consideration, and this rotates around the central axis just in front of the spine. But one thing to look at in terms of the heavenly process and the earthly process is that these are just 2 things, but you've got to engage in these practices of Lo Ban Pai holographically. They're dimensional. So if I'm sinking, something rises very, very gently, and if I'm rising, something sinks very, very gently. It's as if you sink yourself into warm honey, and as you sink yourself into the warm honey, the honey rises, covers you, and when you rise, then the honey sinks down, but it kind of clings to you. So there's a partial residue of each substance that you become engaged within. So it's a complex matter, because this is above, this is below, but in actuality, if I focus my attention forward, and my body goes towards the wall is actually coming towards me. If I go like this and I retreat from the wall behind me, I'm not really moving away from the wall is retreating from me. So you've got to change all your elements of expectation into a different type of function. So if I draw like this, and I go into my belt meridian, and as I move forward, the wall oscillates, comes towards me. The wall comes towards me as I'm moving forward. The wall moves away from me as I retract. So this allows the environment to be flexible and malleable. So as soon as you engage your eyes like this with your feeling, you switch off your expectations. Things begin to oscillate and move in front of you, and don't seem as solid as what they really are. And then and as you, it's quite enormous. I'm kind of rambling now, but if I put my hands forward, my body has to go back. If I draw my hands back, my body has to go forward. If I put my hands forward, my body goes back. So it's counterintuitive. It's not what you think. So if say the heavenly process is basically engaged and then drops into the body. As you drop into the body, when your abdominal sac begins to relax, you become contained in that area. And as you become contained in that area, your awareness sinks to there. So it's so if you could imagine from the back of your kidneys to the front of your belly, if I move forward, then something in my belly moves back. If I move back, something in my belly moves forward. So we've got to be aware of all these particular elements. And so if you say this is heaven and earth, then front and back this is heaven and earth. So it's up and down, front and back are virtually the same. Left and right are exactly the same. So if I move this way, something moves this way inside of me. If I move around this way, something spins this way. If I move this way, something spins the opposite way around. So even if I press my hands down and release, there's something that spins in the fascial reflex to indicate a floating sensation. And these are the powers that some of the powers that you find in your body in terms of a stowaway or an element or a spring that's in the fascia. There's also springs inside of the muscle as well, in terms of the kinetic energy that can be activated within them as piezal energy. But there is a certain amount of electricity. There is a certain amount of stretching in the fascia which returns, and they're called bows. So when no matter what you do, and even if I stretch my chest open, then there's a bow pulled here. So that you could say this was a bow, and then the arrow was pulled through me and behind me. As soon as I let that bow go, it sinks, but something shoots forward. So you follow all the actions, your E or your mind, your intentional base or your attention base, not intentional, but attention base, is focused forward. So your body begins to triangulate, and then to assume that it's maybe 15 to 20 feet or 5 feet or 10 feet, depending on how far you've developed. You put yourself in that distance point, so you're beyond the area of your physical containment and in an area of projection of your body, so that your tissues begin to triangulate and try to move to the area where your eyes are set upon. So then your body becomes very, very finely attuned to your attention, or to the function of your awareness, or your shinpai, which means the capacity of your body to be commanded by your heart process, not your mind process. The shinpai is called heart fist, or the fist that is contained within the process of your heart, not your mind. So heaven and earth is very, very difficult to explain in terms of the complexities of all of it put together. And I've only just this is just very fundamental. And so there are electric and magnetic principles inside of the body as well. And these electric and magnetic principles can be activated from either the ball of the foot, or the magnetism can be accessed through the heel. So there are many, many different pathways that you can progressively assign your attention to, or the jin lines. With the jin is basically the elastic capacity of lines which were hidden from you become obvious, and then you learn to command, you learn to switch them on. You learn to align your spine, which is basically a holistic method of bringing about the power of your dantian into activity by separating yourself from needing to actually even have something functional within the dantian, because everything knits into the dantian. It becomes yoked. So when everything becomes yoked, you activate the internal fires in your system by opening up your joints in your spine, and this is how you activate a very permeable substance that runs through you like warm water, and this is noted as chi. But the chi is activated by something which is very unusual in comparison to what people really believe it is, so. And then you've got to take into consideration an alignment of photons and the external phenomena, which is not really external. We're really one piece. So there's quite a journey to navigate when it comes to this. And then the coupling of your attention within everything that manifests as a realization, and then the causality of that realization then moves into different functions of the dimensional aspect of units of information which can be gleaned by the person who's aware of it. Gosh, I'm rambling, aren't
I? No, this is good. So the planet represents magnetism beneath us, and heaven is, you said, experienced as an electric vacuum.
Electric charge. Vacuous electric charge, yeah.
Okay. Now, one of the things I think I gleaned is that you're saying that we are basically, when you talked about the wall, whether it's coming toward us or we're going away from it, etc., that we're the center of everything, and we see perspective from that, and everything responds to us as if we're in one spot and not moving. You gave that example of the moon. Is it above us? Or if we're in space and looking, or up above and looking at the reflection in the water, is that the moon? And that by saying the moon is above us, you immediately know where we are because our perspective is there. So am I understanding correctly that we're kind of the center, and everything that we project around us is malleable because, I don't know, I guess it's a hologram of sorts, but I mean,
well, if you look at it from the perspective that to discover the refinement of within your physiology is to identify that there's nothing keeping us together. So we are everything contained within form. There's emptiness within form, but there's form within emptiness. So these two contradictory wheels turn in on themselves, and you begin to realize that it's way more complex than what you could really ever imagine, and the journey of progression towards any form of gleaning in terms of enlightenment or shedding light on something which was hidden before enlightenment. So it's so in actuality, if we can disappear inside of ourselves, then everything we can grasp, believe it or not. So the more empty you become inside, the more connectivity and the substance of that connectivity is made available to you via the fact that your awareness begins to see the cascade of units of information which roll into each other as a procession of things which are connected. So once you break those processions of connectivity, you end up in a space of emptiness. So this space of emptiness is very precious.
The steps that you're outlining are kind of us still looking at things linearly and trusting in the past, or allowing that to cast instead of being present again. Yes.
Well, no, not really looking at the past, not really looking at the future, but to generate a certain amount of stillness.
And
where you're actually still viable as consciousness, but there's something missing inside of you. Yet that element that seems to be missing has got access to so much information through the stillness, because stillness has movement within it. So it's an element that comes upon you. I don't know really how to explain this, but I was meditating for 30 years continuously, and then decided to stop this and then go into another area. But the emptiness assumed itself through the movements that I practice. So I find that there is enormous amounts of stillness within the elements of movement. If I do this, if I'm moving and very, very slowly become aware of what the functions of my body, there is something so subtle that indicates that there is something deeply available within the absence of nothing, of something and nothing together. So there's something available within the absence of yourself, within yourself. And this is a very, very beautiful, embracing state to be contained within, because it registers everything which moves, because it has no identifiable point to pin. Where is this? It's everywhere, but it's nowhere at once. And when movement comes into this, then you capture the movement and the essence of the movement. You discover the stillness behind the essence of that movement, which comes at you from an external phenomenon. So whatever's been sent to you always has information embedded within it. So that it's in a journey of discovery all the time, continually. You're never in a position to say, well, yes, there was a stage in my life where I would say that I would wait for a genuine insight to come upon me. Now I'm just, when's it going to stop? So so you wait very, very patiently, and then the cascade never relieves you in terms of letting you believe that there's something else to glean. You're always constantly gleaning something. There is it's like a rushing tsunami coming at you. It's going to come at you. You can't stop it. You started it, and you just have to bear witness to what is unfolding because of your devotion towards the task at hand. It's just very, very difficult to explain where someone is, even though where they are isn't anywhere to be defined. So
I'm gonna try again. So I like my little ball, my little sphere. So you said it creates that emptiness, and when we get to stillness, we have that emptiness that is devoid of anything, and that becomes the vacuous substance, perhaps, that pulls all the information in, so that then we have access to the information we need in that moment, and that emptiness creates the space to receive that.
Yeah, everything that we do is a absolute replica or duplicate of the substance of our general galaxy, our general environment. There are frequencies that come from the planet. There are magnetic fields which bend light. There are the universe moves like this. It moves like this in spirals and moves in very, very specific ways. So what we're doing is in the internal arts is basically mimicking what is out there, because it's inside ourselves originally. Or it's outside, it's inside simultaneously. So it's just like when you see a tree that grows on a vortex, the tree will spin and be twisted by the vortex, even though there's no external force wrapping it like a Japanese master with a small tree, bending it into a particular shape. Is it energy? A vortex will inadvertently change the structure of the growth of the tree, and the tree will follow the actual shape of that particular vortex. So what we're all trying to become aware of is how do we mimic something which is available, which is inherently inside of us, outside of us, simultaneously. So we have access to the universe inside, yet the vastness of the universe outside seems to have such distance, but we have access inside by listening to the very rare subtleties of how something takes your body and generates. You're watching for in your developing, you're looking to move something inside, become aware of what you move inside, then study what you've discovered inside, and then give a certain amount of masteries of that particular movement until everything generates its own capacity to move on your behalf. So internally it moves for you. In the beginning, external, you move it externally to generate an internal movement, so you can become familiar with what is really generally available inside of you. Now, to give you an idea, this is very, very abstract, but I went to a naturopath one time. I think it was around about 21, and she took a little bit of my blood, put it into a underneath the microscope, and there was a screen, live blood analysis, and no, she wasn't. She was quite very, very strong, willful, kind of violent person. So when she looked at my blood was on the screen. It was very, very still, very separate like this. As soon as she looked at it, my blood ran like guinea pigs away from her gaze, and she went like this. And I looked at it and I said, "No, my blood doesn't like you." It's disturbed that you're looking at it.
Means I need to get away from you.
Yeah, exactly. But this is just emphasizing, not to say that the person is bad. What was shown that your body will assume the momentum of projection towards its body, and will mimic that to tell you the story of what really is looking at you. So when you go to now put away the side of the person that generated this particular incident, in terms of me walking out very immediately after I saw my blood do that, but our body assumes the rotational eddies of the galaxies around us. So if we're locked in by our solar system, we're locked in to such a degree that we don't have access to a certain amount of information. Now, if we begin to move in a way which like a pole star, like in the advanced movements of low vampire, there's a pole star movement where you just rotate in a very, very small circle. And this small circle generated, instead of walking around a tree, you walk around, you become the pole star itself. You don't look at the tree like this and you go around the tree. You actually become the central focus. So that means the water and fire process and the magnetic field that you generate mimics the pole star. Now, where the pole star is out of our general vicinity in terms of the planets that surround us, so that when we access the stillness of that particular movement, in terms of searching and walking around, or walking around like this, and becoming totally centralized, we're mimicking the stillness or the axis of that pole that does not move, yet everything moves around it. So do you understand? Everything moves around it. So then there are two realizations or two prompting abilities that a person will realize. I'll move around a tree and act like the cosmos moving around this still star, or I'll act like the star and allow everything to move around me. There are two ways to do it. So in low vampire, we walk in a very, very small circle, and this small circle creates the electromagnetic, the water and the fire principle within the system. And you become magnetic and electrically charged. And as you do so, you relocate the predisposition of your body to actually mimic something which is out of our solar system. So then we have access to different areas of awareness, because the generation of those fields of energy in comparison to where we are, our location is totally different. So that's how you come upon awareness in a way which promotes a different type of delivery, because you're accessing something which is outside the general vicinity of your earth, you know. So this is the way that it works. So you want to leave the general predisposition or the parameters or the frequencies which are influencing our biofield, and go outside of that by mimicking something which is outside of the general vicinity of our location, of our neighborhood. So once we get out of our neighborhood, then we begin to change. And that's why you see that when people do this, they have alternate ways of explaining things, because it's your holographic perspective has gone into an area which develops units of information which have got nothing to do with your locality. It's got to do with a locality, a distant locality. So that's so this is kind of how it works. So you draw upon something which gleans itself through the physical predisposition of the person who's devoted enough to assign themselves to the principles of a different vibratory system.
Okay. So I think that, you answered a question before I asked again, based on your statement that the physical movement helps us to unlock the awareness of energy between heaven and earth. So that's what you just described. And what I got from your explanation was, you said that the stirrings on the inside will motivate the physical movement, and the physical movement will facilitate an alchemy internally, so that we can access, that they're complementary one to another.
Okay, oh, sorry, I've jumped on you again. I'm terrible. I'm going to interrupt you. Alchemy. Okay. The moment you said alchemy, how do you, okay, this is a very, very special subject in terms of how do we glean, how do we gather a certain amount of power inside of our body, and what is the process of gathering substance within the elemental unification of our physical form. When we do exercise or when we move, we're steaming. You understand, we're steaming. When I was younger, if I get into somebody's car in winter, they would say, "Get out of my car, Luan. I cannot see a thing. I've got to turn the air conditioner on, and it's snowing outside. Get out of my car." So I was steaming. I was very hot. So when people would walk by me, they go, "Oh, what the?" It's like walking past a heater, and generating a sort of a blue flare coming out of my system. But the thing is that alchemy is a very, very interesting subject. Now, if I sit in the car and I'm exuding a certain amount of energy, that energy then will cling to the glass. Now, when it clings to the glass, if you want to talk about the alchemical processes, you breathe yourself in, because your organs have particular personalities, particular frequencies. You breathe in, the external environment becomes internalized. As you breathe out, there's a certain mist that comes from your body, because you're concentrated on unifying the external alchemical process with the internal alchemical process. And as you breathe, as soon as you bring some substance inside of your body like this, and you're breathing in this, then you emanate something which you've drawn from outside, and it changes it into another element. So as you breathe in the essence of yourself, like when I say to people, I said, instead of thinking, breathe. And when you breathe, you're breathing in, your body's steaming all the time. So if you've got your body is advancing upon you and you're breathing it in, you breathe in droplets, very, very simple droplets of yourself. But those droplets are a part and parcel of your training. So when you do your training and you're squeeze and you're moving around, and everything squeezes and releases, squeezes and releases, floats. Then you breathe the essence of this, which steams from you back into your body. It's already changed through your attention given to the process. And as you breathe it in, your body gleans the change in terms of the physiological process of steaming. Then you breathe that steaming back in, little by little by little. You begin to fill your whole system with a process which magnifies your internal process, and then harmonizes itself with the external manifestations of your physical form, your bones and everything like this. So then you breathe it into your lower dantian, and slowly but surely something goes into emptiness, and emptiness dripping into emptiness, dripping into emptiness. So that a whole process is a slow alchemical process of redefining who we are into who we're going to become, and we're waiting very, very patiently for that to grow into something of substance. And at first it always goes into a space or an area that you would really believe, how can this really feel? So there are tricks to bring your attention to the area of your body to make it pound and to make the mesentery organ go like this, like this, like this, and it generates its own heartbeat. But I sent you a video this morning about Naga. Now, Naga is the cardiovascular system, all the veins and everything like this. So Naga is something you find refuge in Naga. If you find refuge in Naga, all you're doing is sitting in your blood vessels. So the process of your whole physical system is winding and twisting like a snake within your body. So you find refuge in the elemental structure of your physical form. So then what I'm saying is Naga goes back to its original source, which is the beating of your heart. It's the source of everything which spreads from your body comes from your heart. So when you're doing your movements and you press, you split yourself open and you're looking at everything that's going on inside, your heart will go boom, 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 boom. And then if you're wise enough to sit still enough or to stand still enough, you'll realize that your dantian assumes the beating of your heart. You transfer the beating of your heart into your lower dantian, so you have two locations of animation. So that you bring the animation of your heart and the system of all your cardiovascular system in terms of the blood vessels starts to beat in the center of your mesentery organ, which is the center of your lower dantian, and eventually it goes like this. It goes clunk, 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 squeezes, releases, and then you know that there's a certain development occurring inside the lower dantian, because it assumes to pump independently of your heart, but you've got to reference your heart towards your lower dantian for this occurrence to actually happen, because it needs to reestablish a relationship with Shin Pai, with the I do this, stretch and release back. It is the content of my heart which becomes the power of my action, and the power of my action is automated from the lower dantian, the lower power center. Yeah.
Okay,
so this is one way to look at alchemy.
Okay, I like that. So basically, again, we talked about it briefly when we were talking about Bardo in the last video, but if we are caught in a thinking loop, we want to breathe that in to our midsection, make sure that is united with our lower dantian. The alchemy happens then we get the heartbeat, and that mixes with that cauldron, and the internal alchemy happens there in the lower dantian. And then
not only the lower dantian, you could say the whole body is the dantian actually. Once the spine lights up, then the whole body becomes an emphasis away from this particular this system of gathering. But we've got a general electrical impulse within our spine, which is quite evolved in terms of we don't really understand that we've got a resource that keeps us upright and keeps us functioning. So even if you go into these areas, I say that you can use this method, but once you realize that this method completes itself, then you discover that there's something hidden within the bones instead of generating force, and not generating force for hurting someone, but generating something running through your system that's already running through your system. So you're looking for the stowaway, you're looking for the hidden element which is hidden from you because of the mind expects things in exchange, but if you don't expect anything in exchange, then something will exchange with an unexpecting part of you. That's why it's very, very important not to expect or to perceive that you know something. It's better to let go of knowing something and becoming nothing, because nothing reveals something in terms of what you didn't expect. But if you expect something, it can be put into a socially engineered prospect that you capture yourself within. So you don't want to be captured. You need to release everything, and not to shame or blame, but to find room not to be engaged in something which you habitually have been trained to be engaged in. So this is the alchemical process of leaving what was generally put in front of us that we must accept. It's virtually, you have to neutralize everything. Don't accept anything, and just wait for the surprise to come upon you.
So even though we're going into that alchemical cauldron, we do not want to expect to turn the lead of our past thoughts into the gold. We just know it happens. when we sit in
Yeah,
stillness. Now,
yeah,
I want to wrap this chapter up, but I don't want to leave it without us discussing. We talked about the story before, or people can read it in the book with regard to your encounter with the caretaker of your body as you were leaving a Tibetan lifetime as a monk. But one of the things that stuck out is you said that it's the love and devotion that connects beings throughout lifetimes. And we're going to talk a little bit later about or did I miss that? The convergence of lifetimes. And you and I had another conversation where you said it's the love and devotion that's going to connect that. You're not going to intersect past lives where there was trauma or event. It's the love and devotion that pulls the connection together. Can you say something on that?
Yeah. You can imagine you live your whole life and someone in a certain amount of grief, a certain amount of suffering is in there. The only viable option that we've got, you're sneaking a drink when no one's looking like I do. So when you, I mean, really, what the only access I had to my disciple at that particular point was his. He was generating a feeling to wait for me to send a signal that I've arrived, and it was hundreds of years later. And as I went back to him, I revealed myself as a mist, and he became comfortable in terms of that I made the transition. But he had no idea of what was going to occur with me with that transition, because I made a dozen transitions in one. Coming back into this reality, I came back into this reality in a few different ways, which is very confusing for people. I don't want to put on the table because it's I've written it in the books. It's spread out and it's unusual. But the thing that I know is that what propels you to want to contact me. It's a feeling of I'm understood. It's a feeling of affection. It's a feeling that we can progressively move as a human being without looking for the negative, without being thinking about, oh, is this person going to hurt me or anything like this. We should be void of this completely. We should not have these mechanisms, these weaponized mechanisms within us. So when my eyes gently looked back to my disciple, it was love and affection that allowed me to travel through his persistence and through my caring that I'd left him behind. I have exactly the same feeling now. I don't want to leave certain people behind because I feel very, very responsible. And I want to do as much as I can to make sure that they're as safe as possible before I leave. So I have to give as much information as possible, even if that information is not gleaned. At least it's a pinpoint of focus that they know that I will not let them down, even if they've let me down. And I will always be there to make sure that there is no shame, no blame, even though you take responsibility. Everybody's got to take responsibility for their input. Everybody's got to make everybody else aware of what's going on so that we don't have any form of subtle conflict in any way. So when I went back to him, it was a fulfillment of devotion. And my devotion to him, his devotion toward me. This was quite a beautiful thing. You know, so So this so there are quite a few lifetimes that I do remember. There's one that was quite obscure to me, and I discovered only a week ago what this was, and it hit me in the chest. I couldn't breathe, could hardly walk, and the whole memory came back to me. But what came back to me was the power and the persistence of that particular character in terms of his devotion. You know, and I assumed the knowledge at that particular point of what that person had, which was me. That person had gleaned through his life, and it went boom into my chest. And it was such a strong influx, but it was a strong influx that I could handle because it was something that there was a barrier there, and something broke that barrier. And as that barrier was broken, I began to remember the substance of one particular characteristic that I developed in a lifetime that I lived in India. And I've never really spoken about this, but it's and it's very, very hard for me to talk about it. This particular he was a student of Buddha. He had the same hands as me, had blue eyes. He was tall. He was lean. Everything like this, exactly like me. As soon as I heard the name. When it hit into my chest, and then I went look for this particular individual, and the same characteristics were there. But and it's the same in Tibet. I have the memory of my glasses, my robes, my walking stick, my beads, everything like this, encased. So it's You know, being recognized as a tuku is a beautiful thing, because the tuku, all a tuku does is he's devoted to his wife and devoted to his students. That's it, and that's his path. That's all they do. So tuku is basically just a return to continue doing what was done before, and it's a very arduous journey.
Well, I think it's very sweet that you assume the responsibility of those that you love and know that there's that connection that's going to transcend lifetimes, that'll allow us to contact each other, you know, and just kind of in the universal scheme of things to be able to have those pathways and those glimpses that reassure us that we are loved and we are connected. And so I think that's just beautiful.
Yeah, but there's also, there's also contradictions within this. Is that there are particular signatures that you identify, and those signatures have to do with the persistence of practice, the recognition of what somebody has done or what somebody has gone through is a signature which is very hard to discover, because it rings a bell very, very deep inside a person, you know, and this is the contradiction. There's a very, very big contradiction in terms of the gleaning or the glimpse of something is only like one grain of sand in the whole system. One grain of sand is all you've got to venture into the area which you were doing for the whole of your life. Up to the last 10 years, you've got to be very diligent the last 10, 20 years of your life to make sure that you progressively bring this one grain of sand with you. And that one grain of sand may save you from the tragedy of not remembering and falling into a loop of repetition, which is going to destroy all the practice that you may have done over a few lifetimes. So that's why when somebody gets to a certain stage, they've got an influx of many lifetimes as a remembrance to bring about certain glimpses that this is who you were, this is what you've done, keep doing it. And it's never the same. The emphasis is never the same, even though if I talk about this one particular individual, he taught exactly the same way that I teach right now, and that was hundreds of years ago. So it's or more than hundreds of years ago. So it's so the most surprising thing, you can reuptake what you were endeavoring to finish, and if you continue doing this, it never stops. So that you've got to make a decision at some point that it's time to end this. And a lot of people at this particular moment are saying that it's time to end because it's too difficult to teach now, because everybody expects everything like this. Instead of a lifetime's work, they think, okay, I've done a few postures and everything like this over a period of 2 years, and they've achieved nothing, because it takes 20 or 30 years to read it. Yeah, it takes 20 or what? It takes 20 or 30 years to glean a memory which has substance, but you have to work into that substance with the equal amount of devotion, and during that particular process, your whole framework's different. So you'll assume the information in an altered way, and you have to follow it right through to the very end. And when you get right to the very end, you realize, oh, there wasn't enough time. And the influx of the lifetimes are beautiful, because the only valuable things you can get from your lifetimes is love and devotion, and the devotion towards that the emphasis of, that's all that matters. That's all that matters.
Okay, this kind of overlaps something we were discussing yesterday, and I had a question I didn't get to ask. So you made the statement today that the last 10 or 20 years of life, you really need to be perfecting things. When we spoke yesterday in the previous video, you talked about how our purpose can be finished and we're still living on those years, those 10 or 20 years. What is it that triggers that finish, and what is it that is being finished before we get a chance to have these convergent lifetimes and glean this wisdom to take that grain of sand with us as we go? How do you know that you're done? Or go ahead.
Well, I've got a student, he's an acupuncturist, and he's very, very beautiful, very devoted to me, very loving. I love him very, very dearly. He was, excuse me for saying this, but he knows that I'm going to talk about him at the moment with so much reverence, and the quality of his love towards me is going to be reflected by what I'm going to say. He's going through a state of mourning at the moment. And as he's going through a state of mourning, I know his life's finished. So the value of his morning is that he's left behind a certain characteristics and then traveling into the next characteristics of his new evolutionary process. So his life's over. And when he says I'm in a state of mourning, I understood completely, because I am too. I'm in a state of mourning. So it's it's a very, very valuable thing to know that you're finished and that your job hasn't stopped. So it's like if somebody that you love dearly dies, you mourn for them. Your heart breaks, and you know that something's finished, and you would never give any dirt to their memory, because you're mourning the fact that they were precious. So the same thing is when you leave a certain aspect of yourself, you mourn the fact that you're already gone and your transition is already occurring, but you're still awake and you're still aware that transition is occurring. And the only thing that I can say that was good about the last 4 years is that everybody realized that everything that they realized, everything they knew had changed. So they're in a state of emotional psychosis, because again, oh my God, but they haven't died. But they're in a state of interchanging with the environment, because the change was forced upon everybody to step back, and then things in the environment very, very quickly exchange, and then we're in a world that we don't really understand anymore. So there's that type of mourning of uncertainty, but that's not a death mourning. That's an uncertain mourning in terms of not being comfortable and not being sure about what's going to occur next. When you have a state of mourning in terms of your evolutionary process has ended and you're finished, then the next evolutionary process starts. It's a little bit different to what occurred over the last 4 or 5 years, but it has a tremendous amount of value. It's like if you have a very, very good friend, the sky drops. If your friend leaves you, the sky falls, and you feel, oh, what was supportive there has disappeared. And they may be deranged in terms of why they're leaving, but something in you collapses because they left inappropriately or in a way which has injured you. So you know that you're in a state of mourning because you cherish that person, but that the way you cherish that person, they didn't understand how they were cherished, and they didn't know what they were doing when they left. And they'll come back years later and they'll say, well, I begin to realize what I've done. But that's virtually a state of mourning in terms of the person that you adore that's misunderstood their path, and there's a separation. So then you collapse. So when you leave a certain amount of when you're finished, then something collapses, and then you have to go on with a new perspective, with a new emphasis, and that new emphasis is governed by the subtleties of I can't waste my time, because there's not enough time left.
I like that.
Because you wasted a lot of time to get to the stage where you finished.
Yes. Okay, so now I understand. So it's the evolutionary process that we were in that is finished, that it triggers a new, but definitely, like you said, that subtleness of I don't have enough time. It's a time to kind of consolidate wisdom. There's another evolutionary process that has started, but that's when we're kind of refining and making sure that we can take that one grain of sand in with us. And sometimes I guess it takes 10 to 20 years after we are finished for that to happen. Is that kind of?
Well, that understanding the value of our existence in terms of our impermanence is very, very important, because if we understand our impermanence, then we realize that something is going to withdraw us from the world anyway. So if we get withdrawn before we finish, we're actually in a seat, in a place that is very, very unusual, and it gives a certain emphasis towards what wasn't really seen before, because everything's been pulled away from the veil. So it's a very, very interesting state to be in. I don't know whether I answered that properly, actually.
That sounds good. I think there was a lot of information in that, and that's going to take another listening for a lot of people. So, and I learn more even when I go back and watch what we've just done. So I want to move on to the power of the Old Tibetan. I found it very interesting because as I was preparing, I'm like, okay, what is the gist of this? What is the power of the old Tibetan? He had a knack for identifying truth. And we also get a chance to finally finish talking about that 50% rule as we look at the story of the master and the devotee who was deceptive, giving, which illustrates the 50% phenomenon relating to how we interpret knowledge. And I think the takeaway was, no matter how much you know, you don't know it all.
Yeah, you don't know it all. But without revealing the chapter completely, right. It's actually something which happened in my office, the whole thing. So it's so when you look at this, what prompts your body, you've got to recognize what prompts your body to do something, and you're not really aware of why you're doing it. And then you realize later on that that something has occurred outside of the boundaries of your perception, that you are really connected to it. So it's, and this is very abstract because I'm not really explaining the story, but there is a quality within yourself that will automatically assume that you know. And yeah, so I decided to do certain things because I realized that maybe my student couldn't come pick me up. So I was getting my electric bike ready to go to the office, and I was wondering, why was I doing this? And then I realized that there was something that happened because of the misappropriation in terms of deception and everything like this. And then putting that on the table in terms of you didn't follow the instruction, and because you didn't follow the instruction, he got very, very ashamed and very embarrassed. But the thing is that it was a big lesson for everybody to actually observe. So it's so did he on his path realize that that staying by his word is all he's got. Staying by our word is all we've got. And if you're going to adjust anything, you have the diligence and the respect to say, well, I'm just going to alter my trajectory a little bit. I'm just going to tell you about this.
Yes.
But if you alter an instruction by going against that instruction, there's a line of deceptiveness which hasn't been properly identified inside of the person because they've justified that through their own motives. And this destroys the connectivity between teacher and student because it wasn't discussed. It was hidden as far as they were concerned, but I was aware of it immediately. But I wasn't aware of why I was making preparations. But I became very lucid in terms of, okay, something's happened here, and I was half aware of it, but I didn't want to assume that I knew it all. And I didn't know it all until he told the truth. But I knew that there was deception in the office right in front of me, and then the next day I confronted it completely. So it's it's a very difficult affair in terms of having enough intestinal fortitude to actually get to the point of what needs to stop in everybody's life so that we can generate a new state of consciousness collectively. So we've got to gather our intestinal fortitude to be steadfastly strong but flexible within that steadfastness, to realize that there are ebbs and flows within our environment which indicate that we need to be communicating on the level of intuitive awareness instead of verbalizing, because verbalization in terms of the normal way of communicating can hide certain things within the verbalization and put something in front which doesn't reveal what's hidden behind. Intuitive awareness, there's nothing hidden, you just go bang, that's it. So if you don't discover something, that it's fully everything. If you only got 50% of the information, then you ask the other half of the equation, because I don't want to use my seeing to actually uncover everything, because that's not good. It should be it flows back in on you through the tendency of the person to be absolutely honest and say, yeah, you're onto it, yeah, this is occurring. And then I don't have to use all my energy to discover where the deceptions are or what's really going on. And that's generally really being respectful of your teacher, and your teacher truly being respectful of you by alerting everybody what's going on internally. So that takes fortitude, that takes guts, and it also puts you in a state of vulnerability, because you're stating that I'm aware of something, but I'm not completely aware of it. Unravel for me and tell me the truth. don't allow me to dig into your life by using my energy this way, because my energy is meant to use for the path, not to unlock your secrets and your devious behavior.
So that was an example of you deciding not to use that city of seeing for an improper use, but being present in that moment. Now, you talked about
not actually an improper use. It's just I really like to put my eyes down. I don't like to use this all the time, because then I become impermeable, very, very strong, and like a mountain, like a mountain or a tree that you bump into. And sure, that was hard, but you know, it's I don't want to have this. I want to relax this to allow people to be open and honest and pure with me. And I want to put my eyes down. I don't want to use this all the time. I really don't want to, because why should I? I mean, the other half of the equation should realize that their seeing will come about by releasing their foibles in a truthful manner, instead of me searching for those foibles and fighting for them to actually see what they're really doing, when actually they do know exactly what they're doing. So it becomes like a sort of like draining your energy into a pot which has got a crack in it. So you put yourself into that pot and it leaks. You don't want to put yourself into a leaking pot, because your energy will be endlessly devoured by the person who doesn't do the work on themselves to heal and to seal that particular part of themselves, which needs to be purified by not doing it, you know.
Right. And so you're not doing them, you're allowing them to be themselves and to be revealed. So you talked about the ebb and flow of communication, and also how, whether it's true or false communication, they're going to create ripples throughout the universe, space and time. And that you talked about how the thief and the ghost are passed between others in the absence of open transparency. And so that's when that happens. Would you like to elaborate?
Well, you're looking at there is the effect of entanglement in terms of feeling. So you don't want to have a feeling of entanglement in terms of undoing something which needs to be undone. That entanglement causes an unwholesome connection of feeling. This is virtually karma. So how do you stop this generation of feeling which is unresolved because of dishonesty, because of not living properly? You've got to give enough room for yourself not to be engaged in this way. And usually when I'm not engaged this way, maybe somebody might respond. They might think that I'm not properly engaged with them, but I just don't want to connect with that line of reasoning, or that line of karmic results in terms of connectivity. I don't need to be connected to that. None of us need to be connected to that. We need to resolve to do what needs to be done without connecting to a circumstance in a way which entangles people emotionally. And instead of tightening and loosening the body, you become tight and you can't loosen it, because it's like an endless fabric. It's very, very difficult to get into the woven part of that fabric. It may seem like a pattern, but to unravel that pattern is very, very difficult, very, very complex. So it's best we don't start it. So the best way is to become clear of those particular feelings and ask people to take responsibility for their own evolutionary process. And in a lot of cases, there are expectations towards teachers to undo you, when it's basically the first impulse is to help them start the undoing, and then the process is all in their hands, not in the hands of the teacher continually, because that's it's too engaging, because the teacher needs to be released so that they can progressively move on their own evolutionary path and just slightly dip into your world, because they've been there and they don't want to engage in that anymore. But people want to draw back and have this social connection, and this is why it is so important to be free, or in the Tibetan philosophy, in terms of the lamas, called tukus, that they act without causing entanglement. They don't want that entanglement, because they know that entanglement can cause a lot of rifts in terms of their energy not being free enough when they leave. Yeah.
And the entanglements that I just want to, encourage everyone to make sure that they read that chapter in the book, because I thought that you gave a great example, a very detailed example of how the entanglement of that one untruth, that one lie affected three different lives.
It affected like it was described in the book as your ship of attention is on a sea of awareness in terms of the fluctuations. So as soon as somebody does something, it changes the directory, and as it changes the directory, the trajectory, sorry, as it changes that trajectory, your life paths can be altered to such a degree you can never get back on your path again. So you've got to be very, very careful not to fall into an alternate path which has been created through deception or through undisciplined behavior. And to recover the room was quite a big effort for myself to bring the truth to the surface in terms of suspicion, deception, and everything like this, to bring it to a point and of resolution, so that you can understand that interaction is a very, very complex affair in terms of the results of that complexity. You know, if someone promises that they're going to be this way with you and then they're not that way with you. I'm naughty, Anna. I'm talking about something we spoke about before. So if somebody promises to be some certain way and they drop that ball, what have they done in terms of you trusting that they're going to be a certain way, because that's a general agreement of integrity. If that general agreement of integrity is dropped because the devotion towards the path isn't adhered to in terms of where is devotion to my own truth, devotion to my own ability to stay stable and not to destabilize somebody, not to destabilize anybody within the impulse of your being towards other beings, and slightly shift them on their trajectory, and the sea or the fluid that they're traveling upon is actually inside of us. So you know that, like when I said with the naturopath, as soon as somebody does something, I begin to adjust and change. As I begin to adjust and change, if I'm not aware that I'm being adjusted and changed, I can go down to a path which may be very detrimental. So if we become aware of this, we may not know the absolute outcome of not being aware of where we're being led. But when we get there, is it too late? And can we recover ourselves once we get to the position to realize, oh, where am I? I'm kind of lost. And what happened?
And hopefully
so we've got to be
that center again.
Yeah, and we try to recenter ourselves, but that's just the part and parcel of being in life, because a lot of people like to generate instability to gain power over somebody, which is wretched in a way. So it's so if we could just leave each other alone to such a degree to discover our angelic possibilities begin to become voluminous. And this is basically a very, very beautiful thing, a very, very beautiful path that many people are missing because of their ulterior motives. Instead of seeing there is an alternative motive of the universe to actually generate love within you, because in the end result of the universe is to tenderly say that I've embraced you, but you're going to go back and do something again because you didn't embrace what I asked you to embrace within your own life.
Exactly. That drum beat went out and it didn't quite come back yet.
Yeah.
Okay, and you continue the explanations of entanglement in the chant chapter, where you talk about how the appreciation of this sweet chanting that was so pure allowed Nadi to trigger the city that allowed you to see through or pick up information from through a couple of walls in an outbuilding.
Oh, I actually saw. Okay, I'm a really unusual guy. Everybody thinks I'm ex-military. Everybody thinks, this guy is onto everything. You can't do anything. He opens up the door and looks at you when you look at his door. What's going on with this guy? So it's but generally what occurred is I play a certain om in my house, or a certain very, very beautiful music which it generates smoothness within my system. But there were guys outside that were working on the street. that put their ears up against my garage door, and I became aware of it. And as I was walking out the front door, I looked to the left, and there was around 20 feet, and there was a wall in between the garage and between them, and I could see the silhouette of their being, and I knew exactly who it was, and there was light shining from the transparent individuals that I was observing through the wall, through that vortex. Now, as I saw through the vortex, I knew exactly who they were, and when I got to the edge of the building, they jumped like this and looked at me and pretended they weren't listening to what was going through my office into the garage. They were kind of nosy, but when I put that in the chant, the general predisposition that I was really explaining there is that by the fact that I could see through the wall and had the power to see them energetically, a nadi or a power had made itself available. And I'm quite an unusual person. I want to deny myself everything because I don't want to go down a path that may trap me. So it's a trap enough just to be here. But as I looked through, there was a very, very minor glimmer of something watching me watch them. And as I realized I was being watched, that observance of me was very, very subtly, not in a calculating way, but seeing what I would do with the power which opened up to me. And I didn't want to do anything. I wanted to honor the thing or the being that was watching me evolve through this particular power, or this dilemma which was given, that was being handed to me. Am I going to pursue this, or am I going to pursue what's watching me, not pursuing the power which was given to me? So I've always decided to not to follow the power, but to be contained within the idea, not the idea or the realization that I'm being observed continually. Will I go down that path and develop that city, which is a dead end path as far as I'm concerned? Because once you get to the ultimate end of a power, that's it. And you may follow that for many, many years. And how much time have you lost by doing that instead of allocating your awareness to a divine process, which is so far removed from our three-dimensional reality into some other reality. And I want to glean that. I don't want to glean this. I don't want to do this sort of thing, this sorts of things in this world. I want to do something that's unparalleled in terms of our worldly process, because it's too repetitive to follow these types of powers. As far as I'm concerned, it's just it's an erroneous element. Even though when I deny myself these powers, they accumulate and triangulate in their variables, and then I become a completely different human being, because 10 or 20 different powers are triangulated on one particular point, and then the manifestation of these powers coming together brings about a state of awareness which is very, very similar to what was watching me. Instead of taking portions of those powers and assuming, oh, look at me. Instead, no. It's a different affair, because the accumulation makes you responsible by not using them, but allowing the combination of that to allow you to see more deeply into the circumstances. So you begin to look at the world the same way that what was looking at you assumes some sort of ability inside of you through your sight, instead of you taking a tangible element to become famous with an ability which seems unusual. And that type I don't want that type of fame.
You talk about that, how we're being witnessed and observed during these times. Will we own that power? Will we solidify that and be anchored in that? Or that we're being observed for the choice we make, that it's a test, and that we're being observed for that choice? Yeah,
it's either we stay in a framework that we can't escape from, or we release ourselves from the framework and then elevate ourselves to something which renews us into an area of devotional aspect of your being, to wait for what's going to come upon you in terms of how it makes you feel very, very beautiful, to wait for these elements, and these elements can be transferred to another human being in terms of devotion. This is the only power I'm interested in.
Okay.
Nothing else, because anything other than that closes certain doors. And the danger of practicing something which is beyond certain realms of comprehension is do you really see, or do you really see when you do something you really see? I don't know. You know, it's like to take yourself off a pedestal and put yourself into the most humble position. And the most humble position brings about a communion of the only thing that really matters is that the general functioning of the universe is a feeling-based, there's tremendous dangers out there for sure. But there's something, there's a creative force which sustains its ability to embrace you in a way that you didn't realize you could be embraced. And this is a very isolating feeling, but a very, very complete feeling at the same time, because you've arrived somewhere where it's very difficult to transmit until you have an enormous amount of feelings to actually shift the content of your environment, so people become activated in a way which is completely unusual for them. And this power is the only power that's useful. The exchange of something which doesn't have substance, but it has an enormous amount of feeling of gratitude within it. Otherwise, it becomes something else other than what it really should be.
Okay. In light of, because we're going to continue talking a little bit more about entanglement, but I had a question. You made a statement in this chapter that one who voyages within the physical form must reawaken to the implications and subtleties to realize that we're a passenger in this vessel. So that brought me back to the passerby principle. So how do we reconcile being a passenger in this vessel and being one who is passing through to the entanglement, the bioenergetic entanglement that allows the transference of the information outside of our bodies? How do we reconcile those two aspects?
Well, when you really look at it, I mean, who is traveling inside of you, Angel? What is divine in? No, you know it. What is divine inside of you? What is precious? What is precious? What is it inside of you that you want to transmit to somebody else? What is it in somebody else that you need to have transmitted back to you? There's a being inside of our physical body, and we've got to recognize that particular being. And it's you can't hear it, you can't see it, you can't speak on its behalf, yet it can speak on your behalf. So you've got to find that divine essence within inside of you and allow it to communicate and grow, so that you can go beyond the physical representation of the limitation of our human form to ascend to something quite extraordinary. And this can occur. This really can occur in physical form, but it's unusual for human beings, for a human being to actually obtain this multifaceted capacity to be aware of a dozen things simultaneously in terms of the implication of you being here, or we being here, or someone being here. So we could describe that as in the analogy as a rainbow body, is that you begin to recognize all facets of light, all facets of complexity within you in terms of the convergence of light. But that convergence of light is personalized towards the framework of the individual's body, but we're still got to escape the framework of our individual body to assume responsibility for the spirit that's ascended into this form, descended into this form, so that we can assume the responsibility of reascension. And that ascension is to lift ourselves from the entrapment into something more soliciting more love, more devotion.
So when you were first asking that question as to what's within me that I need to receive or give to another one, I thought of love, but then you had a different aspect. And then I thought, well, is it the kind of the intersection of the Holy Spirit that is within me? Is it a God self, or is it all of the above? And it depends on which lens I'm looking out of at the time.
You know, just imagine if I subject you, I brought you with me, and we were with beings not from this planet. And they did not do anything like we do. They look like they're withholding, but they're not doing anything. They just don't do what we do. So if you're in a community that don't do anything that we do, you actually gravitate towards their being, because it's totally different to the way that we function, and there is a certain amount of freedom because we lose the confines of the engineered process within us to discover there's a universal process of equalization within the universal ebbs and flows. So when you're around somebody that maybe is not from here, you'll realize that they're really not from here, because the transmission of information is totally different to the way we communicate. But it's just a simple reminder that we've lost our way in a certain degree, that we have to return back to the natural ebbs and flows of the universe to discover what we're really meant to do in this physical vessel. And there's a certain amount of attachment. You could imagine there's a certain amount of attachment from these particular beings, because they do not indulge in what we indulge in. So, and once you're subject to that, then the process of unlearning is very simple, because you have to assume how can I understand something which is not spoken yet is revealed, and in the present time moment, without anything that you're used to, you begin to gravitate towards that type of awareness. It's just like if you sit by Buddha, what are you doing? You're just assuming to follow what he's not doing anymore.
I think that's like you were saying, if we have the opportunity to be among these expanded beings that might have process consciousness in a different way, we take on the shape of that new environment. It reflects back to us that awareness, and that kind of has a change. Like you said, knowledge doesn't have to be conveyed. It's just a matter of being in the presence and having that container reflect back to us now what is in their.
Look at it this way. Look at it this way. Inside your body, you know that you can watch the world. You can watch everything you do. You can watch everything that's occurring within the world. So we are watching the world, and we are being perceived through the capacity of ourselves to watch the world. So we can absolutely assume that we don't need to be like everybody else. We just be exactly who we're really meant to be. But the conditioning is verified through loops over and over and over again, and we've got to attempt not to be standardized by that particular awareness. So who's inside of you? That's the thing that I'm going to ask you. Who's inside of you that you respect immensely, and what do you perceive is the full outcome of your journey in this body? And you'll say, well, who is inside of me?
Am I supposed to have an answer?
No, but I just wanted to show you something. Who's inside of me?
Yeah.
Now, if I say who's inside of me, as soon as I stop, there's an enormous amount of stillness. To the point that the stillness reveals that there's a being inside of me that wants to watch the world in a way from that perspective. So you just look at a picture of me right now because I'm so still. But there is substance within the stillness, and there's substance within the awareness of the stillness. So I watch myself and watch the world through the stillness. So our evolutionary process is to assign our awareness to the entanglement of the world. Do you understand? So there was a point where I didn't exist, that in my discussion with you just right now.
That
actually
makes sense.
Do you understand? So there is a being inside of ourselves, observing, witnessing, but is it still enough to actually define the emptiness that's been obtained through the devotion through a lifetime? So if I become static, you see a rendered image of myself within that stillness. You can't define what you're looking at because it looks like a picture. The picture has no substance, but I'm sitting here still. And then when I move again, I give animation to this. But can you see what's behind my animation? If I show you what's behind the animation, then there's just a still frame. And the still frame has learned to be so still. So as it becomes so still, it assumes responsibility for everything that moves that stillness, it moves through that stillness. You understand?
Yeah, because just in asking that question, who I am, and being still for that minute, I could feel, once I stopped trying to answer a question you didn't ask, I could feel the emptiness and feel that observer, that
Yeah.
yeah.
So then you got to ask yourself a question: if we've got the capacity to be so still, to be observant of everything that emanates from that stillness, you're extremely responsible, because then you're watching the world. You're watching everything from this perspective. But if there's movement inside of people, then how can they see the stillness? Do you understand?
Yeah, because you can't.
Yeah.
Because as long as I was trying to do and figure, I couldn't get it. But the moment I got still and quiet, that vacuous substance allowed that feeling to take root.
Yeah. So our evolutionary process, in terms of becoming more evolved beings, is already available to us. It's just a matter of there is no substance to the evolutionary process, yet there is substance in that evolutionary process. But that substance then reveals the emphasis of an attention which comes and vibrates inside of if you're a harp, everything goes through you like this. You become, every tune that goes through that emptiness becomes a viable vehicle of communication, in terms of stabilizing an entity which is lost to try and discover that the only thing that really matters is to be still within the movements of your whole emphasis of your being. So there's stillness within movement, and movement within stillness, and that's how animation occurs in terms of communication. So once you find this, it's a beautiful thing.
It is.
But it's yeah. I don't know how else to say anything more about it.
No, thank you. That really helped. That clarified that understanding. I want to go into the As I Am chapter, and you talked about that is, as a whole, is conquering one's self-reflective bias, and use that beautiful scripture from Buddha: as I am, so are others. As others are, so am I. Having thus identified self and others, harm no one, nor have them harmed. Now, as you go over each of the the 4 parts, you talk about a 5th hidden meaning that weaves through all of them. And you gave examples of some of where our interpretation or position on each segment of the verse can be either a blessing or a curse.
Yeah, so you have graduated meaning within that saying. So when Buddha put this forward, it was basically just as a form of graduation to understand this: as I am, so are others; as others are, so am I. Thus are they identifying self and others, harm no one, nor have them harmed. There are graduated meanings within this, and I graduated those meanings in the text, just incrementally right through the whole book to allow people to understand this saying has a lot of meaning. As I am, so are others. That could be an entanglement.
Right. You said that it could be a dogmatic application of knowing and doing, and that would be the curse of the wooden spoke.
Yeah, the wooden spokes. So there are certain meanings within that. As I am, so are others. As others are, so am I. Thus identifying self and others, harm no one, nor have them harmed. There is a labyrinth inside of this, and I did reveal that inside of the book. But as I am, so others can be. Well, they're just exactly the same as me. That's what is that? You understand? As I am, so are others. But as I am, so are others. So I project my clothing, or I dress them in the idea of myself. As I am, so are others. As others are, so am I. So they can project back that I'm dressed in clothing that they projected towards me. This is another way to look at it. Thus identifying self and others, Harm no one, nor have them harm. Don't dress them in any clothes. Don't dress yourself in any clothes, and do no harm, because you have to be still.
And that's where you talk about being your beautiful, loving self. And just
be your beautiful, loving self. That's all that matters. And
right.
within the generation of that, you're tested to actually keep your voice pure. If you've got a thought process, it's got to be a good thought process. If you've got a physical representation, you're representing yourself. There can't be any harm in that. There can't be a tone of harm in your voice. Every micro gesture, you have to watch every micro gesture you do. You have to navigate yourself before you navigate other people. And as you navigate yourself, you take away the emphasis of an engineered process to discover the divine elements within you, because you don't do those things anymore. As I am, so are others. As others are, so thus. As others are, so am I. There's very, very big secrets inside of this. And harming no one and never have them harmed. There's many, many different secrets inside this. So this can be divided even into the thief and the ghost, the thief and the projection of a unwholesome feeling. So the thief and the ghost are just a complex element of 70 different types of, hungry feelings or things like the hungry ghosts. And it goes down the tract of forces which we don't really want to be to indulge in. We have to come back to ourselves and really look at who are we for ourselves first, and what are we doing to someone else secretly. Once this is realized, then the journey has more depth.
Okay.
And,
go ahead. I was going to say that kind of is a good transition into the blessings, where we're talking about forgiveness and you talk about putting to labor of love those things which grieve you, any harmful projection from others, not to forget to forgive yourself, and to look at them and take that, let's call it a stone.
Okay. When you say let's have a look at that. Forgive yourself. What are you forgiving yourself for? If someone puts a content inside, you forgive what's inside of you, and you don't build upon what's been put there. Because you're building a structure inside of yourself. If someone gives an unwholesome foundation and puts it inside you, you want to build a house out of that. So forgiving other people with inside of yourself, there's nothing to really forgive as long as you're not projecting. But the ability to forgive someone else is forgiveness inside of yourself. So it's a very, very complex subject in terms of is how do you forgive yourself in terms of put the worst thing that you've ever done on the altar of perception, and the altar of your perception, promise you'll never do it again until it fades away into emptiness. Because whatever you've done that you feel ashamed of, put it right there and say, I'll never do this again. But you don't shame yourself. You're altered by the fact that you diminished your character by doing something which is against your very character.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's guilt or shame. One or the other come to you, and they need to be, brought into the light. You were also talking about how when you realize that your own riverbed is dry and you need to replenish your soul by going into the light and getting replenished. I kind of see that as also a forgiveness of allowing yourself, giving yourself permission to be nurtured, to be full.
Yeah. There's being riverbed dry is basically there are a certain amount of people that I will give an enormous amount of energy to it, but then it suddenly has to stop. I have to withdraw, because the line of the conditioned social response is to have someone on a tether, someone on a hook, and from a teacher's perspective, you can't be on the hook. You've got to withdraw, cleanse that connection, and then go back to it without the same emphasis. So it's responsible for a teacher to withdraw, to establish an empty point instead of a repetitive point, a loop of often of divisive behavior, which keeps you trapped in what is socially expected upon you. So being riverbed dry is just, no, I've had enough. I've got to withdraw.
Exactly.
Can't do it anymore. Yeah.
But so, I put that right with the forgiveness, because some of us are overextended and feel guilt in needing to withdraw or cut certain people off. But that's a love of self that, preservation first, law of nature, got to take care of yourself.
But also too, it comes down to honest open communication. If somebody's trapping me like this, look, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to have a break from you. And when we reestablish it, don't use any phrases or any micro gestures that I'm aware of in terms of entrap me on very, very subtle levels of guilt and very, very subtle levels of obligation, which I'm not really obligated to travel upon, because I don't want that emphasis in my life, because I've left that. I don't want to go back. You have to come to me. I'm not going back to you. So riverbed dry means that I can't leave where I am to go back to where you are, which is, I wasn't there in the first place. So how can I go there? The student has to progressively go towards the teacher, and to allow the teacher, as soon as they meet the teacher ascends even more. But if the students try to draw the teacher back, and this is one of the basic, I saw it in a Tibetan center where the guy, this Lama lost complete control because the Europeans wanted him to be entrapped in their idea. It was destroying him, because he had to continually enter their world, because they wanted to socialize him instead of allowing him to be in his reclusiveness, even through the connection of communication. You're still reclusive, but if there's an expectation, if the people can't change, then it's a very, very difficult position for the teacher to be in. So that you have to be very, very strong not to be drawn into these areas of areas of conflict, actually, an expectation for your teacher to be like you, instead of you trying to dissolve every part of you to become like the goal of your teacher.
I like that. You said not become like the teacher, but become like the goal of your teacher. Yes. I like that. Thank you. Thank you for that. Another point you make in this chapter is, am I a blessing or am I a curse? And looking at the curse as the obstacle and the blessing being the way through it. And how motive is a subtle form of corruption, and expectation is a form of entitlement that may possess us. And this is also what might be a curse to us or hinder us. So in that asking of, am I a blessing or am I a curse? Is there a way of immediate reflection or a point of focus that you can give students to how to process that?
Okay. There are two ways to teach. It's called ritual. It's follow your students into all their dilemmas and tell them not to do it. And if they do it, you follow them in to disconnect them from what they've done with it, where you ask them not to do it. And through doing this, you glean a lot of wisdom, but you become entrapped in a localized field of defiance, because the person hasn't got enough discipline to follow the instruction. So the teacher will go in and glean certain information, but that's a dead end path for the teacher, because it'll come to a 10-year period, and the teacher will say, well, I've had enough. I can't follow you anymore, and you've ignored the instruction. But then there's another type of teaching. You be completely forthcoming, and don't allow the student to go off into tangents, which then redefine your teachings into an area which are erroneous, instead of dissolving your desire to be something you shouldn't become. But if a person is put in this position and they gain notoriety, they can mislead a lot of people through the misapplication of knowledge in a way which gives people their permission to be a way that they really shouldn't be. I mean, I'm being very vague here, because I don't want to put somebody in a position of being responsible. But when you look at this, it's everybody's responsibility to follow something that is being prescribed, so that they can sort of limit their desire into the desireless perspective, and the desireless perspective will give volumes of variation instead of a localized area of entrapment. And when a teacher goes into those limited areas of entrapment, it's quite dangerous for them. So they have to shift this person aside and keep moving forward with their life, or they get trapped in the dilemma or the ignorance of the interchange, which isn't evolutionary. So it's it's like no nonsense. Let's move forward, or then if the teacher doesn't realize there's nonsense, they get trapped, and it's quite a difficult path as if a teacher's not wise enough to actually see this. I don't know whether I'm making sense. Am I making sense?
Well,
because I'm being
making
very
sense
abstract.
from a teacher's perspective, but from the student's perspective, how do we process the analysis of whether we're being a blessing or a curse in this situation?
To be humble and to be joyous, to be devotional. A teacher is extremely devotional, and if the student's not devotional, then it breaks down this a very, very beautiful entanglement in terms of devotion is not to be who you were, but to become something you would never expect. And this is the difficult thing for a student to come to terms with. You become something you don't expect. And that expectation, if I could say, well, I've got a student, her name's Janina. She's full of joy, she's open, she's loving. She rides upon the feeling of devotion and joyousness in terms of that devotion. So that she can travel on this particular emphasis. But if somebody doesn't travel on that emphasis, they take down the teacher's got to be very, very careful not to go down those paths with those students, but to stay firmly adhered to a devotional path within themselves, and hopefully that the students can glean what's going on. But it's everybody's own personal responsibility, quite frankly, to come to a point of being humble enough to actually see that there's not enough time. And that youthful exuberance is not wisdom. It's something you have to pass through to discover that there is a limit within our lifetime. If we don't see those limits quickly, those limits will come upon you like a tsunami, and it'll flood you, and it's too late. I'm being tough, aren't I?
No, this is all good. This is good, and I'm gonna let that sit because I've got to marinate in that one. But I wanted to ask you. You make a comment about or ask the question: do we wish to be noticed in a situation, and the danger of wanting to be noticed? Can you speak on that?
Yeah, well, there is a time when in everybody's lives where they want to be noticed because they want to be recognized because they haven't really arrived. If you arrive, you don't really care about being noticed. So being noticed, wanting to be noticed when the work hasn't been put in is kind of like too quickly to the surface. Like it's like the flower budding too early. So the flower budding too early brings about sour fruit. Even though it looks like it's tasty the moment you consume it, you may think that you're on a trajectory towards some form of enlightenment, but it becomes sour because the person didn't really attain anything. So attainment takes many, many years to occur. The only thing that is obtainable is devotion and adherence to that particular devotion, and be patient enough to see what really is meant to awaken inside of you, instead of preemptively trying to hurry that journey up in terms of the project. Look at me, look at me, look at me.
Okay, so that makes sense. So wanting to be seen before the work is done, I immediately thought about the mountain too, about, saying you attained it before you got there. And that that's before the work is done, but that once we are actually obtained or completed the work, we're not even interested in seeking recognition. So, okay.
Yeah, because life has a toll. There's every boundary that you go through, there's a toll. And that toll is the very essence of our life. It's the time we spend. And the payment is aging.
Ooh, that's not good.
Well, it is. The payment is aging. The older you get, the payment is you make a payment, and the payment is your life itself. So the payment, you have to make sure that you invest in the right things. Sound like an investment banker now.
No, so that actually makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah. So the payment of youth and beauty is age, and that's just the way it is. As when you get to your autumn years, do you want to be brittle and dry, or do you want to be a little bit moist enough to realize you've got a certain amount of time left? So when you get to that particular point, you realize this, that everything that you gleaned is slowly being taken away from you. And as it's being slowly taken away from you while you age, you realize, what can I gain from everything that's been taken in terms of the process of life, assigning the value of time you've got assigned to your life path. So if you realize there's not much time, then aging is the process of your realization. And the closer you get to your death, the more relevant that equation becomes.
Okay, now that puts aging in a different category. Okay. Okay, that makes sense. So that was the beauty of that. Let's wrap things up with the gratitude chapter. There's some wonderful things in there. It's just that big, but it's got a whole lot in there. And one of the things you talk about is honoring gifts as a form of devotion and the giver, and that our appreciation and care for the item or whatever we are gifted sends back love to the giver, so long as the gift was given without motive. And that all acts of generosity are divine.
Yes. It's really true, because anything, even if kindness is a gift, a physical gift is still an act of kindness. It's not having any motive behind what you give. Like when I was living in Asia, I would give when we start traveling, I would probably give my computer away. I would feed these people who are hungry. It's not expecting it in exchange. So there's these. If you can't take something with you, then give it to somebody who doesn't have that, instead of trying to obtain money for that from a community that is insanely poor. So giving is very, very important, and letting go of what you obtained is very, very important, because you're going to lose everything anyway. I know this sounds really, really, like a people would say, well, that's not very smart, but in the end, what can you take with you? I know you've got to be safe. You've got to be nothing. Or you can take a portion of this with you. The only thing that has some substance is something which can't be bought or procured through objects. Everything that you've got possesses you until you leave, and once you're out of your body, you realize that you can't. Everything you obtained actually meant nothing. So you've got to. We've all got to really travel towards everything that I've got is going to be taken eventually. So how much can I give? And how much am I obtaining and possessing? Because then the objects begin to possess you. So that this becomes a kind of a nightmarish thing. It's enough to want to guard and care for someone that you've journeyed through your whole life. That's a different affair, in terms of you don't possess them, but you don't want to you don't want to leave before they leave, because you don't want to leave them abandoned. Right. So there's a different type of giving. There's a different type of way to look at things. Is that the only thing that really matters is that you care enough to make sure that the people that you're going to leave, you try and leave after they've gone, not before they go, because I find that disturbing.
I do too. I'm hoping that there's a let's go together type situation, so neither has to go through it.
Whichever you wish for.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, so as we wrap up the gratitude chapter, I mean, basically, the whole gist of it is that we need to love unconditionally, and to remember that what we gazes back at us, because that's going to reflect who we are, and to go ahead and love unconditionally. And one of the things I wanted to, at the end of this book, as we go back and reflect on all of the principles that we've discussed and talked about in mastering the art of being, knowing, and not doing, that again, revisit after going through this, go back to Whisperings of the Dragon and Who Am I? Because in the Whisperings, you're going to get some techniques and exercises, because I'm a formula girl. Tell me how to do this step by step and I can do it, until I reach that point of centeredness where I am led. But in the meantime, give me a structure. So a lot of that is in Whisperings, and the Who Am I is a beautiful look inside your mind as you process and apply these principles that we've just discussed. So if you read it before, it'll have one meaning, but having gone through this book and then going back to them, it makes all of that just so much easier to layer your understanding and to take things home. So that, and to remind everybody to please take a look at seeing about doing the low band pi, because I said that physical piece is, we can do a whole lot intellectually, but we need to integrate body and spirit and soul. So to be sure to take a look at this website, parallelperception.com, and see about doing the low band pi initiation series in person, because there's something about that in-person transmission that if online is your only option, that's one thing, but if you can get there in person, get there.
Yeah, the thing that a lot of my students realize is that there's an enormous amount of magnetism in the room, which defines what they're looking for. So I spend 5.5 hours, 6 hours before I go to the office to be full enough to transmit, and then I keep doing that over and over and over again. But it's really important to transmit the magnetic feeling, and also to open their hearts to a certain degree, to realize that they're looking for something which is quite beautiful, but within the grasp, but out of the grasp simultaneously. So the room has been set up in a way that the vibratory essence is very nurturing and it's like a cocoon. So it's the inside of the room and the outside is two totally different things. So it's yeah, thank you for mentioning that. But as far as I'm concerned, teaching someone is something which takes me 9 hours, even though I'm only in the office with someone within the afternoon, but the preparation of that, and when I go to sleep, there's also another element of that occurring while I'm sleeping as well. And we haven't gone into this subject in terms of what I discussed before. We can get into that when maybe we do the other books or something like this, in terms of what really happens in terms of taking the karmic elements of someone inside your body and then releasing them in a field of perception, which is appropriately done by a teacher, if the teacher is deeply involved enough to actually have this occur. And we did speak about this, so I don't want to go into that subject because I know you're wrapping up. It's a very, very deep thing, and we all do it. But we're not really understanding the depth of what's really occurring within communication. There's a strong entanglement. There's a strong emphasis on receiving, and if we can understand this, then our process will quicken. And I explain these principles in the office, because in-person contact, it's the only way to actually generate the subtleties of communication in that environment. I mean, of course, it's happening right now in terms of the vibratory essence of what's really being projected from you, from me, in this conversation. If you can actually hear those microgestures, you travel upon those feelings. And they're the microgestures of a heartfelt communication. Is something very, very difficult to align with, or you can feel it, but can you replicate it? And being in close contact, it's more easier to do in terms of being subject to that frequency.
I agree. Yeah. So this is great. I'm just trying to wrap it up because we are both very long-winded. But like the donkey.
Yeah, not like the donkey.
Not like the donkey. But we could go on and on. So it's enough, hopefully, to get people to revisit and have a deeper level of understanding. That is my prayer. And I would look forward to doing this again with you. This has been so wonderful. And so I'm hoping that we can do this again on another book.
Oh, of course we can. Come on, girl. When are we going to do the next one?
I want to go back to the beginning and do the art of stalking parallel.
Ooh, that will be a labyrinth. I tell you, that will be a labyrinth. And the reason,
that's why I want to do that.
Yeah, yeah. It'll be fun. It'll be
It will
fun.
be fun. It will be fun. And I could see that I couldn't cover everything in this book in the times that we had budgeted. So that might be a deeper dive, but I'm game if you are.
Yeah, I am. I am. This is really wonderful.
Okay, great.
It's a very nice revealing.
Yes. Well, I'm going to wrap things up and thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for your time and all of the sweetness that you've conveyed and for giving me this opportunity. I feel privileged. I feel honored. And I hope that everybody who is watching gets as much out of this journey as I have and more.
Yeah. We'll back at you.
Thank you. All right.
Okay. Lots of love to you.
Love
Angel.
to you
Lots
too.
of love.
Bye-bye,
Love to everybody
everyone.
else as well. Bye.